Welcome to This Explainer. I want you to think back to when you were young. What really makes a kid's book truly unforgettable? Is it the wild action, the hilarious characters, or maybe that awesome feeling that you're in on a secret the adults just don't get? Well, today we are exploring a story that perfectly captures all of that magic. It's John Coley's Skate or Die Jacob Jones. But we're not just looking at a fun story today. We are literally looking at a masterclass in stealth education. Okay, let's dive into this. It's the ultimate challenge for any educator or parent, right? How in the world do you take incredibly dense subjects, like the complexities of physics, human biology, and local American history, and package them in a way that a 13-year-old will actually want to consume entirely voluntarily? Because, let's face it, if you just hand a middle schooler a textbook, their eyes are going to glaze over instantly. The answer, hilariously enough, is skateboarding zombies. No, seriously, to keep a kid turning the pages, you have to hook them with absolute high-octane chaos. Skate or Die Jacob Jones introduces us to a 13-year-old prodigy and skateboard sensation who suddenly finds himself smack in the middle of a massive zombie outbreak in Arizona. It is wacky, it's incredibly fast-paced, and on the surface, it's just pure, unadulterated middle-grade fun. But the true brilliance of this story is buried right there in the details. Take a character named Stella, for example. Stella is an escaped laboratory animal who ends up hitching a ride on our hero Jacob's back to escape the zombies. Throughout the entire story, almost every single adult and teenager points at her and screams about a monkey. And almost every time, someone has to correct them. It brilliantly illustrates a fun, foundational biology fact that gets repeated so often it actually becomes this hilarious running gag. Monkeys have tails. Apes, like our pygmy chimpanzee Stella, do not. So the kids reading this are laughing at the clueless adults, but they are secretly absorbing real taxonomy along the way. Which brings us to the core question here. Is this just a wild, silly adventure about a kid doing kickflips over the undead? Or is there a payload hidden inside this narrative? The truth is, Skate or Die Jacob Jones operates as a Trojan horse. It sneaks in real-world facts, emotional intelligence, and complex science completely under the radar, packaged perfectly inside a zombie apocalypse. Section 1. Sneaky STEM Lessons. This story is absolutely packed with sneaky STEM lessons specifically designed to trick kids into falling in love with science and math. Our main character, Jacob, isn't just good at skateboarding. He is a literal mathematical prodigy. We learn that by age 10, he had already grasped algebra, trigonometry, geometry, and calculus. But his true love? That's physics. Why? Because to Jacob, skateboarding is just physics applied in the real world. It's poetry in motion. When Jacob is surrounded by a mob of flesh-eating, we'll get to what they eat in a second, zombies, he doesn't just panic. His brain is actively evaluating sines, cosines, tangents, hypotenuses, trajectories, and centripetal force. He calculates terminal velocity to execute the perfect jump over a horde of the undead. Kids reading this aren't just reading a cool action scene, they're seeing complex math being used as a literal superpower to save the day. Now, what's really interesting here is how the author tackles the zombie outbreak itself. Because these aren't your typical supernatural movie monsters. The story actually grounds the whole apocalypse in biology. Step 1, the locals at a farmer's market are accidentally exposed to a military nerve gas. Step 2, this specific gas causes severe potassium depletion in the human body. Step 3, without potassium, the victims lose fine muscle control and the ability to speak, which is exactly why they just stumble around groaning ba, ba, ba. And step 4, the cure isn't some magical, glowing antidote. It's just massive consumption of potassium-rich bananas, and eventually, citywide fire hoses spraying banana pudding. So the crucial takeaway here is that kids reading this are getting a fundamental lesson in human biology and nutrition. The book explicitly defines potassium as a mineral that is absolutely necessary for your muscles to function properly. Without it, you become a stumbling, mumbling zombie. The author has basically taken a standard health class lecture on vitamins and minerals and disguised it behind a giant wall of flying banana pudding. It's such an unforgettable way to teach a kid why they should eat their fruits. Section 2. Hidden History Facts. But the stealth education definitely doesn't stop at STEM. The author uses this chaotic landscape to weave in some incredibly specific, real-world American history. The story is set in the real town of Sierra Vista, Arizona, right next to Fort Huachuca. Early in the book, Jacob's cousin and guardian, Dana, gives him and the reader a quick history lesson. She explains that this area was the historic 1800s home of the famous Buffalo Soldiers, the celebrated black regiments of the U.S. Army.
Then, moving into the mid-1900s, the town claims a very unique and very real piece of fast food history, right before we arrive at our present-day fictional zombie showdown.
And that quirky piece of history is the number one, as in the very first McDonald's drive-thru ever built. The book explains that a fort commander actually gave an order that soldiers weren't allowed to enter restaurants while wearing their uniforms. But, soldiers still get hungry. So this specific McDonald's in Sierra Vista built a drive-thru just so the troops could grab a burger without breaking military protocol. It's a fascinating, true historical anecdote, and it grounds this incredibly wacky fiction directly onto a real-world map.
Section 3. Real people, real heart. Let's move on and see how this builds, because a story can have all the science and history facts in the world, but if kids don't actually care about the characters, they just won't keep reading. What makes this story resonate so deeply is the authentic emotional core pulsing right beneath the humor. If we look at the authors afterward, we find out that these zany characters aren't entirely fictional. They're actually based on real people the author loves. Jacob is based on a real student of the author's. Dana is his actual cousin, written to capture her exact real-life personality. Even the hilarious military privates turned rock stars, the Skunk Apes, are based on the author's real high school friends and bandmates. This infuses the dialogue and the relationships with a genuine warmth that kids can immediately detect. And because these characters are rooted in reality, the book offers some incredibly powerful, seamless social and emotional representation. Jacob's hyperfixation and brilliance in mathematics reads beautifully for neurodivergent kids. Dana, his guardian, has type 1 diabetes. Right in Chapter 1, she casually checks her insulin pump in the middle of a fast food restaurant. It's not some tragic plot point, it's just a completely normalized part of her day. Furthermore, Jacob lost his parents, and Dina, his cousin, adopted him. They are a non-traditional family navigating the world together. The author normalizes chronic illness management and adoption so effortlessly, proving that great children's literature can build deep empathy without ever feeling preachy or heavy-handed.
Section 4. The Power of Story.
Which brings us to the real emotional peak of our explainer today. We've seen the math, the biology, the history, and the beautiful representation. But why did the author go through the trouble of building this Trojan horse in the first place? Well, it all comes back to this incredibly touching dedication from the very first page of the book. It reads, "Years ago, the real Jacob told me that if he ever wrote a book, he'd call it Skate or Die. Since he wasn't given that chance, I thought I'd write it for him." Beneath all those skateboarding apes, the banana pudding fire hoses, and the zombie chaos lies a profound act of love and remembrance for a student taken far too soon. The author built a whole world where Jacob gets to be the hero, an unstoppable mathematical genius saving an entire town. It really makes you realize that the media we hand to kids is so much more than just a distraction, doesn't it? Skate or Die Jacob Jones proves that you can absolutely respect a child's intelligence, teach them about the physical world, and expand their empathy, all while making them laugh out loud. So it leaves us with a great question to ponder. What other wonderfully silly stories are out there right now, sitting on our shelves, secretly teaching kids how the world works while we aren't even looking? I encourage you to look a little closer at the next wacky adventure you come across. You just might find a Trojan horse of your very own. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.